Now, maybe some of you like some of the other videos I've done on this channel over the course of the past week. Maybe some of you want me to go back and talk about sports. Well, if you want me to go back and talk about sports, this is what I was kind of waiting for. I've been waiting for free agency to kind of cool off a little bit for the NBA, so that way I could kind of recap some of what's going on in free agency. Well, those of you that like the sports videos, you're going to get plenty of them over the next couple of days. I'm going to be doing quite a few of them when it comes to NBA and free agency time. I'm going to be talking about the best and worst free agent signings, the best and worst free agent re-signings. I'm also going to talk about the biggest winners and losers in this NBA offseason period. So plenty of videos to come, so just stay tuned. This video, though, is going to be about the 10 best NBA free agent signings. And when I say free agent signings, I'm only referencing players that went from one team and signed with another this offseason. Re-signings, best and worst, are going to be separate videos in and of themselves. So we're not talking about that here. We're just talking about the best 10 signings with players going from one team to another. Now, it's a combination of things. Some of it could be the amount of money a team paid or didn't have to pay in order to get a guy. Some of it could be about fit. Some of it is about the money they paid compared to other similar players that maybe got a lot more. You know, some of it could be what it represents for the team. It could be any number of things. So all of those kind of factored in. But here are my 10 best free agent signings in this NBA offseason. Now, a couple of honorable mentions really quick, actually. I kind of like the Nets bringing in guys like Thomas Robinson and Shane Larkin on the dirt cheap, former first-round picks that haven't really found their footing at the NBA level. For a team like the Nets that lacks in first-round picks for the next several years to come, you know, these are the type of guys that they're going to need to gamble on and take chances on, and they're not really hurting you if they don't pan out. But if they do pan out, you know, it could potentially reap some benefits and rewards for you long term. So bringing in guys like that, I really like that. I like the Heat bringing in Amari Stoudemire for 1 year and $1.5 million. You know, he's not going to be a star anymore, but he can still be a serviceable player, give you some quality minutes off the bench. I like moves like that. Not every good move, though, made the top 10. So number 10, let's start it off. Ed Davis to the Portland Trail Blazers for 3 years, $20 million. You know, for a team that had to prepare for life after LaMarcus Aldridge, they dealt off Nicholas Batum. They lost Robin Lopez in free agency. They lost LaMarcus Aldridge in free agency. And Wesley Matthews, mind you, in free agency as well. I really like this move of Ed Davis. 3 years, $20 million. You're basically paying him a little under $7 million a year. A guy that's efficient on the offensive end, even though he's not a huge part of your offense, but a guy that's a really good rebounder, and a guy that I think is still having his best NBA basketball ahead of him. And when you look at the fact that Robin Lopez got, what, $13+ million from the Knicks to be an inferior rebounder to Ed Davis and an inferior offensive presence to Ed Davis, I thought the Portland Trail Blazers made out like gangbusters in this deal, in my opinion. That's the way I look at it. Number 9, Arron Afflalo to the Knicks for 2 years and $16 million. With that second year being a player option, it's basically a 1 year, $8 million prove-it deal. This is a good, really good deal from the Knicks standpoint because they bring in a legitimate starting two-guard at the NBA level, somebody that can space the floor for Carmelo Anthony, which helps, a guy that can defend some, which also helps. But look at a guy like Afflalo, too. He has some playoff experience, not a ton, but some. But he also makes a bit of a statement, too, from the Knicks standpoint of the fact that they could at least sign somebody in free agency, but he could also help come in and make them more competitive next year, which could maybe make the Knicks more appealing come next year in the offseason in the free agency period. If it works out with Afflalo, great. Maybe you re-sign him longer term after this season. Maybe it doesn't work out. If he doesn't opt into his player deal, his player option, it's 1 year and you can move on. And you just lost $8 million, but that's about it. It could have been a whole lot worse. For a team that you remember the horrible deals like Eddie Curry and Jarrett Jeffries and all that bad money Tim Thomas they gave out over the years, they could have done a lot worse than giving Arron Afflalo basically 1 year and $8 million. Number 8, Monta Ellis to the Pacers. I think when all is said and done, about 4 years, $44 million. We talk about the things that Monta Ellis doesn't do well. We can talk about the negatives about him, and sometimes we focus on those things too much. Here's a guy that's a 19-point-per-game scorer and a consistently proven 19-plus point-per-game scorer at the NBA level, and he's proven over the past couple of years with the Dallas Mavericks that he can do it on a viable playoff team. So he's not just a guy that will put up a ton of numbers on a crappy team. He can put up some decent numbers, albeit as a volume shooter and volume scorer on a good playoff contending team at least. And for a team like the Indiana Pacers, who needed some perimeter punch to go along with Paul George and George Hill, they get plenty of that in Monta Ellis. He could be even better in the Eastern Conference. I like the fit for him in a smaller market environment. I like the fit for him where Paul George is clearly established as the man. I like the fit for him playing alongside George Hill in that backcourt where George Hill could potentially make up for some of Monta Ellis's defensive deficiencies. This is a really good deal, I thought, for the Indiana Pacers. You know, if he doesn't work out, it could be a contract that could still be potentially tradable, or if you have to buy him out, maybe it's not the worst contract to have to buy out. But you know what, $11 million a year, especially when you look at the fact that the Dallas Mavericks let him go to bring in a guy like Wesley Matthews, who is pretty much the same age, who is a lesser player in my opinion, with a torn Achilles for max money, 4 years and $70 million. It makes this Monta Ellis deal look a whole lot better. Number 7, speaking of the Mavericks, Deron Williams gets 2 years and $10 million, which basically with that player option second year is like a 1 year, $5 million prove-it deal. I love 1 year prove-it deals, especially with guys like Deron Williams, former All-Star. Frankly, we forget a former elite point guard at the NBA level with size, who could shoot, who could defend, who could facilitate, you know, who could score at a decent clip. Well, he's not that same player now. You get a guy still in his early 30s, if he can have a healthy season with the specter of wanting to play for another big contract coming up this next offseason, Deron Williams really is a nice addition for a Mavericks team that needed somebody like him at the point. They needed an upgrade at the point guard position. They most certainly got it with Deron Williams, no matter what negatives people want to say about him. You know, he's a lot better than what they already had, and they got him on the cheap. And if it doesn't really work out, it's for 1 year pretty much, and effectively, you got to really like that if you're the Dallas Mavericks. Number 6, David West to the Spurs. Well, I still think West was a bit crazy for turning down, you know, close to $12 million of guaranteed money to go to the Spurs, or maybe he could have gotten the mid-level exception or close to it playing for another contending team. It's hard to knock the Spurs for bringing in a guy like David West at 1 year at the veteran minimum. Here's a guy that could still start at the 4 at the NBA level, even at age 34, 35. He's a guy that could, if you needed him to, give you 12, 13 points a game, or, you know, 10 or 11 points a game, still rebound some. But a guy that, you know, is good for the locker room. He's a good leader. He probably could fit well anywhere he needed to play. Really good move for the San Antonio Spurs. Increase your bench depth by giving a veteran like David West the league minimum. And again, what we like to talk about too with a guy like David West is a guy that's never won an NBA championship. So there's a hunger there at this stage of his career, as proven by how much money he turned down, to sit there and go play for a team like the Spurs and fit in and get in. Gotta love that move for San Antonio. Number 5, Josh Smith to the Clippers for 1 year in the veteran minimum. You know, you really got to like this move for the Clippers too. Gives them some versatility in terms of if they want to run with the smaller lineup and play Blake at the 5 and they put DeAndre on the bench, you know, they can run Josh Smith as a bit of a stretch 4 and not give up too much on the defensive end, because Smith is a decent defender, a good rebounder, a pretty good shot blocker. He could give you more overall in the offensive end than a guy like DeAndre Jordan. But also keep in mind, too, is he's a guy that could back up Blake, so you could spell Blake some. Again, he could back up DeAndre, play there some. I do think you could play some 5, especially when you run one smaller, or you can play him at the 4 when you want to play Blake at the 5. Gives him some versatility and some options. You know, Josh Smith showed me during his time in Houston, during this playoff stretch, that he understood who he was and what he could bring to the table. While he still had his moments, he also had some good moments, and I thought at times he stepped up relatively nicely in the playoffs for that Rockets organization. So it showed me that if I'm a Clippers team for 1 year at the veteran minimum, fuck. And if he doesn't work out, you cut him, and how much money did you really lose? But all the while, you're bringing in a guy that can bring some things to the table. This is especially important considering DeAndre Jordan is your center. And while Josh Smith is not a great free throw shooter, he's still better than DeAndre Jordan, meaning if you have to sit DeAndre Jordan most of the fourth quarter and you need to run a small lineup, Josh Smith could still bring some things, and you're not sacrificing that much on the defensive end. Number 4, Mo Williams to the Cavs. A guy that's played with LeBron in the past. He's familiar with Cleveland, so he's familiar with playing with LeBron. Mo Williams understands at this stage of his career, I think, what type of player he is and what he brings to the table. In terms of LeBron James, he has some comfort and familiarity playing with Mo Williams. He understands what a Mo Williams can bring to the table. For a team like the Cavaliers, they needed that legit backup point guard that could also be kind of that combo guard. Could back up Kyrie if you needed him to, better than Dellavedova in my opinion. But he also could play alongside Kyrie at the 2 if that's what you needed to do, because if you're the Cavs, you have to be concerned, apparently not concerned enough to not give Shumpert $10 million a year or maybe re-sign J.R. Smith, but those guys really didn't show up in big situations. And when you lost Kyrie Irving, that really hurt. Now you get a guy like Mo Williams. He can play that combo guard. He can play some one. He can play some two. He's a guy that can put the ball in the hoop, and they needed more guys that can put the ball in the hoop. They got him at a very cheap price. I love this move for Mo Williams and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Number 3, Paul Pierce. Speaking of moves that I love. It's the LA Clippers for 3 years and $10.6 million. How crazy is that? The Clippers basically got Paul Pierce to opt out of more money and playing in the Eastern Conference with the Wizards to come out west to take less money in the Western Conference. It is a great country or what. But when you look at this, there's a lot of familiarity there with Doc Rivers, but you get a Paul Pierce. Yes, at the tail end of his career. He's not quite the truth that he once was. But as you saw at times in the playoffs this year still and throughout the season for the Wizards, a guy that could still be productive and bring a veteran presence, a guy that can stretch the floor, he can hit the outside shot, he can create his own shot some. Most importantly of all, he's not afraid of the big moment. He can defend somebody. He's willing to take the big shots. He's willing to be on the floor when it matters. He understands what it takes to win, and he's been there before. And for a Clippers team that imploded in the semifinals, giving up a 3-1 series lead to the Houston Rockets, they needed a guy like Paul Pierce. They really, truly did. And a Paul Pierce should pay some decent dividends for the Clippers this upcoming season for sure, because now you've got a guy that understands what it takes, a guy that is comfortable with taking and making the big-time shots, a guy that's not going to shine away from the spotlight. I love this signing of Paul Pierce by the Clippers. You get a guy like him, a future Hall of Famer, who's a really good role player at this stage of his career, and you didn't even have to give him the full mid-level exception. That's crazy. What a move. Number 2, Greg Monroe to the Milwaukee Bucks for 3 years, $50 million. Of course, that third year is a player option, so you probably think he's at least a Milwaukee Buck the next 2 years. The Milwaukee Bucks have a lot of multi-positional wing players, from Michael Carter-Williams to Chris Middleton to Jabari Parker, to the Greek Freak. You could even say a Rashad Vaughn, their first-round pick this year. They've got all types of these guys. The one thing they don't have is a legitimate center, a legitimate low-post option, somebody that could help them space the floor by getting his rear down low. Greg Monroe can do that. He can be a legitimate center at the NBA level. Might not be an all-star type of guy, but you never really, I think, got to fully see what he could do because the fit between him and Andre Drummond playing in the same front court in Detroit wasn't ideal, especially at times when he was trying to share the floor with Josh Smith, too. That was a bit of a disaster, frankly. Well, now you bring in a Greg Monroe, who is a legit 5. He's not a great defender. He's a solid, okay rebounder, pretty good rebounder, I guess. But he's going to bring offense down low. And they needed size down low, and they needed offense down low. And this is a team that struggled to score the ball down low and in the paint area. And Greg Monroe is most certainly going to positively affect both of those areas significantly. This was a great move for the Milwaukee Bucks, a bit of a statement move, too. You know, for a market like Milwaukee, you don't always have the opportunity to bring in these types of guys. You've got this young, athletic, multi-positional, perimeter-based nucleus. Now you bring in that kind of linchpin center piece in the middle. It makes a big difference. I mean, the Milwaukee Bucks become a real team to reckon with in the future in the Eastern Conference because of this Monroe signing. Number 1, though, I got to go with LaMarcus Aldridge to the San Antonio Spurs. He was a max player. He got max money. I love this deal for San Antonio because they get a guy that can help them now and a guy that can bridge the gap and help them long term when the Duncans, the Ginobilis, and eventually the Parkers kind of to get staged right. You know, this isn't really the Spurs way. But in some ways, that's okay, because at some point in time, you have to go outside of your comfort zone to do what's best for business. And what was best for business for the San Antonio Spurs was bringing in a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge and his multi-dimensional offensive skills to San Antonio. I mean, you bring in a guy now like LaMarcus Aldridge to a team that has Kawhi Leonard, that still has Parker, that still has Duncan, that has Danny Green, that has Ginobili, that has all of this. You're talking about a Spurs team that's added David West. This is a Spurs team that is a legit contender this year. So LaMarcus Aldridge impacts you now, and he impacts you in the future and helps you, like I say, kind of transition to a new era, the post-Duncan, Ginobili, Parker era. And does it at a price that you don't feel bad about. 4 years, $21 million per year. I'm assuming that 4th year is a player option, so at least 3 years. That's pretty good money for a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge that could still average 23, 24 points per game, both being a post player and being a stretch 4 at the NBA level. That's got to be the best signing of this NBA free agency period, in my opinion. You can let me know your thoughts on some of the best, but I thought this was a pretty good and fair list.